Okay, on three, we'll do 5.
Okay.
Okay, ready? 5.
5,
4,
4,
3, 2, 1.
1.
That sucks.
This is Infants on Thrones, the philosophies of men mingled with humor. We are the Core.
Hey, welcome to the Infants on Thrones podcast. I'm your host, Tom Perry, and this particular podcast is on guilt. We had a panel discussion including myself, Bob, Randy, Glenn, and Matt. And in this episode, you'll be enjoying clips such as...
I think the reason why Tom doesn't feel guilt anymore about not doing home teaching is he's shifted his moral outlook or code to not include home teaching as something that he should feel bad about.
The church isn't structured that way. It's in fact, it's structured exactly the opposite way. It is trying to minimize the Tom Perrys of the world. It wants less of you, not more than you. And
I agree.
And you're just not letting them have it.
I have seen stuff that, if a soul exists, has damaged my soul to never be recovered. And I still believe that, by and large, people are good generally.
really ridiculous rules like no shorts on P-Day and sit down to pee kind of rules on my mission. So I mean...
Because in guilt, the sense is that it's an internal voice of criticism. It's the voice of conscience.
So why don't we go ahead and get started? In this discussion that you're about to hear, I've broken up highlights of the discussion in the hopes that it's going to be a little more entertaining, a little more engaging for you, the listener. So you'll have to let me know on the website, in the comments section of this podcast, if you feel like this works, if this format works or the style works. This is kind of an experimental thing, but I thought it would be an interesting format to try on you guys, and so you'll have to let me know if it works. So, enjoy.
So, Tom, here's what I want to know, if I can ask this question, because we're just starting this podcast with all of us getting on, and we recorded one episode before this where we said we're going to be really entertaining and fun.
We're still going to be entertaining. We're still going to be entertaining.
And so, for your very first podcast, you want to talk about guilt, and I just want to know why. What's the inspiration for you personally?
There's really
the first
no
thing you want to tackle.
I just wanted to get a panel together and talk about something that had been on my mind currently. I mean, in fact, this is what really sparked it. You want to really get into the psyche of Tom? Here we go.
I just want to hear the story.
Tom is feeling very guilty right now. I can't wait.
Yeah.
I've been bombarded recently about getting my home teaching numbers up, and I've been slacking like this. And then there's this new guy that's a real gung ho guy in the high priest, and he's been calling and emailing me pretty good. And I've noticed one thing: I don't feel guilty for not going anymore. And so that really is what sparked it. I was like, well, I want to talk about guilt because obviously I've made a shift. Because it wasn't that long ago. It wasn't that long ago when I would get that email or I'd get that phone call, and I'd be like, "Oh crap, yeah, you know what? I do need to get out and do it." But I don't feel that anymore. So I wanted to talk about it.
Well, I haven't done home teaching in years. In fact, I have a standing agreement with our elders quorum president that I there's 2 of my friends who are technically my families, and one of my friends is my home teacher, and I said. The only caveat I have is you don't ask me about numbers, you don't ask them about numbers, just assume it's done. And he said done. So it works out pretty well.
Well, Tom,
Do you feel guilt for that? For
I feel zero guilt, actually. And that does bring up an interesting point. What Tom said is, some of the reasons why we feel guilty are the activities or behaviors that we're should or should not feel guilty over. And like home teaching, for example, which is just an institutional construct, should we really feel guilty? Should that cause anybody guilt? And would that type of guilt be healthy versus, yelling at your kid, where you might feel guilty or feel remorseful from? I think that the example is kind of an interesting one.
When I was going through my faith crisis, I actually came across a study that was done. And it was trying to find out who are the happiest people. And what the study found was that people whose behavior aligns best with their moral code are the happiest people. And so, to me, I'm going to make an even further distinction between remorse and guilt. Remorse has something that pertains to more universal truths. If you look at all the major religions, they all have certain overlaps that basically all humans have. Don't kill, don't cheat, don't abuse. All the like obvious moral
Except
truths.
when God tells you.
Wait a minute. You mean like when God commanded Nephi to kill Laban?
What is this thing you ask of me? Is not the word of God written, thou shalt not kill?
Behold, the Lord slayeth the wicked, to bring forth his righteous purposes. It is better that one man should perish, than that a nation should dwindle and perish in unbelief. Slay him, Nephi.
No.
I command thee in the name of the Lord God. Slay him.
Well, that goes under the guilt. Okay, so and then you have all the things that differentiate all the major religions, like all their different codified things that aren't universal, that you don't see in each religion, home teaching being one of them. And so if you
reading your
feel
scriptures,
remorse, I think the reason why Tom doesn't feel guilt anymore about not doing home teaching is he's shifted his moral outlook or code to not include home teaching as something that he should feel bad about. But I think Tom would feel remorse if he beat his wife, because that goes into more of a universal. So I think if you are violating kind of a universal, obvious moral truth, you'll feel remorse. I think that's what separates psychopaths from normal people. Even though you call me a psychopath, I'm the furthest thing from it. But anyway,
that was a joke.
But I think Matt hit it on the head when you are violating like a arbitrary construct like home teaching or going to the temple. Then I feel guilt. I think there's an important distinction there. I mean, does that make sense to anybody?
I like it. I don't know if the rest of the world adopts that way of thinking. That's kind of how you articulated it pretty well. That's how I sort of grew up. But I wonder if outside of religion, if that's the status quo or if the two words are just conflated all the time. Is there a non-baggage term for guilt or shame?
Let me interrupt Bob real quick, because I think he asks a very important question right there. I want to play a clip from the BBC Radio podcast entitled In Our Time, Philosophy. And you can access this podcast at bbc.co.uk/podcasts/series/IOTP for In Our Time Philosophy. The BBC Radio has many wonderful podcasts and radio subscriptions that you can listen to. But this particular clip that I'll be pulling from is from a podcast that was published back in 2007 entitled Guilt. And philosopher Stephen Muhall will be speaking in this clip, and he'll be talking about shame and how it is connected and related to guilt.
Shame, in effect, has to do with the notion of saving face or losing face. So that already gives you a sense that it's concerned with appearance. It's concerned with the way in which you look in the gaze of other people. Sometimes it's to do with some behavior you've performed. Sometimes it might have to do with your appearance, how you're dressed, how you look. But of course the most basic example, I suppose, is feeling ashamed if you're caught naked. So it may just be the simple fact that you have a body, in effect. And what makes shame distinctive is, in part, the ways in which it drives us to act. If one feels ashamed, what is one instinctively inclined to do? And I think the immediate answer to that question is to hide, to remove yourself from the gaze of others, ideally to disappear altogether. You want the floor to open up and swallow you, in effect. So the implication would seem to be that a way to avoid feeling shame would be to do the shameful deed in private. And if you manage to pull that off, then you shouldn't feel that response, that sense of doing anything wrong. And if we have that kind of conception of shame in place initially, then guilt becomes much more clearer in contrast with it, because you're not going to escape feelings of guilt simply by hiding yourself away in a corner, away from some other people's gaze. The critical voice, the voice that tells you you're doing something wrong, is going to come with you into that private place. And that's because in guilt, the sense is that it's an internal voice of criticism. It's the voice of conscience, I suppose, in a familiar way of picturing the whole idea. And what that means, in effect, is that you're engaged in a process of self-criticism when you experience guilt. You're saying that there's a certain kind of ideal that you've internalized, you're measuring yourself against, and you're failing to measure up properly to that standard. So we get a picture of the self as being sort of split between what it thinks it ought to be and what it actually is, and the aspiration is, ideally, for those two parts of the self to come back together, to synthesize, so there's no gap between what the voice of conscience wants you to do and what you're actually doing. And that means, in effect, also that you've got a notion there of autonomy. You've got a notion of the individual subjecting himself to his own kind of criticism. And that contrasts quite sharply with shame, at least on the surface, because shame tends to focus you on the gaze of other people, and it suggests that you're responding to their sense of what's right and wrong. And it suggests that the individual is being subordinated to the social group as a whole.
Do you feel like guilt is term is more of a religious thing? Is that what you're saying, Bob?
I'm just saying it has a lot of baggage, and I think it's correlated with religion quite a bit. And I guess not that there's anything wrong with that. I just feel like it's a negative thing. People try to avoid it, whereas if you talk about remorse, it seems like that's a very natural state of being that everybody should expect to experience on and off throughout their life. Whereas guilt, if you just got rid of it, at least the way I grew up understanding guilt, I would just love to never see it again. Whereas remorse, I understand there's a place for it in my life. Does that make sense?
It's sort of. I mean, I guess I just view it a different way. I see guilt as maybe more of a remorse thing, and I don't have a problem calling, even in a secular version, guilt. Like if you crash into a car, you feel guilty for not paying attention or something like that. Build our morals from, and I mentioned this in the beginning, and building off of what Randy said, because if you are in a religious institution or in a religious belief system, there will be times, especially depending on where you fall in as far as the belief spectrum, if you're going to become a very literal believer or a very strong believer, you're going to adapt certain aspects of said religious institutions, guidelines, or morals, and you're going to institute them to your core. And so then you're going to start to feel guilty for things that maybe normally you wouldn't have. And a lot of times those guidelines are really inappropriate and can be destructive. Like for example, the homosexual issue, where homosexuals are innately evil. I mean, that's a very destructive, at least in my opinion. I think it's a very destructive thing.
But the more I guess pedantic, or the more numerous the rules, the more potential for guilt. Like for example, with Mormonism, I wonder how many people out there feel guilty for not writing in their journal, or not having a garden, or not having a full year supply, and how tragic that is.
See, but this raises a question that I've been debating in my mind as to how much we weight different commandments, because you're like commanded to be perfect in all things, right? And there's all these task list of things that we have to do, but then at the same time, there's like the top 3 sins, the like murdering, denying the Holy Ghost, committing adultery. So there's like more weight on those things than there is on like journal writing, or these really stupid things. Like on my mission, the mission president made it a rule that we had to shine our shoes every day. We had to eat wheat cereal that's Moogie every day, and he would make a point of saying, if you don't do those things, then you won't have the Spirit to be with you. But I didn't believe him.
Well, let's go to something.
You didn't.
No.
You didn't.
No.
How many people did that were OCD, that had to obey every rule, or felt they had to?
Those were the ones that clucked like a chicken all the way home.
Because I had some really ridiculous rules, like no shorts on P-Day and sit down to pee kind of rules on my mission. So I mean, yeah.
That way you didn't touch yourself too much. I love it.
Like a non-priesthood holding woman?
Did you believe those rules, Tom? I mean, like, did you feel like if you violated them, you really wouldn't have the Spirit with you?
It wasn't a matter of believing the rules, and obviously we have this in our list to get to. It's obeying the Lord's servants. If you believe that your mission president is inspired and guided by God, and he's in that position because he was, there's a reason for him to be there, and he's actually getting inspiration, revelation, personal direction for you as a missionary. And even if he comes up with a silly rule like sitting down to pee, you're going to freaking do it. I mean, only if you feel like that he really is guided by inspiration, because it's always that domino effect. If you don't start to obey one rule, then you don't start obeying another and another and another. And the next thing you know, you're sleeping with girls or animals or whatever.
Wow.
That's a slippery slope.
Let me give you an example of that. I do think it's the small things matter for a lot of people, and maybe journal writing's a bad example, but take the word of wisdom or attending whatever. The example that I heard on my mission was, and I thought it was so frickin' profound. It was, when you're fasting, even a spoonful of water is inappropriate. And I said, oh wow, that's so profound. It's the little things, man. And so you can attribute that to, if I don't wear my church or eat my Kashi cereal like my mission president says, that really is just as inappropriate as the major things.
But there's a subconscious loophole that Glenn alluded to, and that's that there is this master set of things you have to abide by in order to be a good Mormon and to be fully fellowshipped and have full membership and go to the temple when you're older and participate in the things that you do as a Mormon that are beyond just the anybody's welcome, come to church sort of stuff. And the subconscious loophole is the fact that we all know we're not perfect and we all know we're progressing in this life. And so at least when I was growing up and on my mission, some of those stupid rules I would break all the time, not because I was like a chronic rule breaker, but because I was keeping the big ones and I was doing what I thought was the best path for the best missionary work, I guess.
But did you recognize at the time, Bob, that these rules weren't really connected? Because we've got that scripture in the D&C that said that every blessing is connected to some kind of a commandment, and if you do the commandment, then God's bound. And so people take that to these ridiculous extremes.
I, the Lord, am bound if you do what I say. If you do not what I say, you have no promise. It's one of the few I still remember, which probably speaks to my guilt issues, right?
Yeah, but like, didn't you cognitively realize that some of those things were so mundane that they couldn't possibly be related to some kind of a heavenly blessing?
No. Like, I don't think that I thought it through to that logical conclusion of like, this is total bullcrap. I just more thought of like, I see that there's some good intentions here, but if I pass on this, or if I get out the door at 9:35 instead of 9:30, it's not the end of the world as compared to like sleeping with that woman over there. Like there's just degrees.
Or animal. Don't forget Tom.
Oh yeah, right. Of course, because that's what comes next.
Yeah.
There's just degrees of sin or violation or breaking the code. And we all know we're imperfect, and we know that every day we're going to make mistakes, and that's drilled into us. And it's kind of this weird catch-22 of like you said, OCD people really have it tough because they'll never get it right.
I think this goes to what Randy was saying earlier about your actions aligning with your morals. And if you realize that those morals aren't really, what did you call them, Randy? Like universal morals?
There's universal morals, and then there's the kind of arbitrary constructs that they're idiosyncratic per world religion. Like don't eat pigs
or permission president.
Really, I mean,
or culture,
or culture,
But Glenn, to your point, when you said that these little mundane things, I mean, it's in the scriptures. I mean, I think it was Randy that put in here that whether it be by my own voice or the voice of my servants, it's the same. And that's how I felt. Like if the mission president was going to even give a rule, like something that I even felt like it was silly, it may reduce my amount of guilt or shame I was going to feel if I violated. But I still felt a little bit of guilt if I didn't obey it.
Okay, so then was guilt really a behavior inhibitor? Did it really control what you did, or was it just there nagging at you?
What's the difference?
Well, the difference is you obedience, like how you're acting.
It affects your well-being.
Yeah, because
a bunch of little things add up.
Guys
like Glenn were, you had a sensibility that I didn't have, and maybe Tom didn't have on our mission. We took this stuff really seriously, and you have one major sin, yeah, that makes you feel like crap, but 5,000 mini sins add up.
This is to the point, Glenn, is there was things that I wouldn't have normally even considered or even thought about, wouldn't even pass my realm of thinking at all, like sitting down to pee. I mean, why would that even be something I would even consider? But
was that really a mission rule?
Yes, it really was.
Oh my God, that's the greatest rule ever! I thought you were being hyperbolic.
No.
What was the justification?
Did you just say hyperbolic?
What kind of blessing did you get from that? What was the basis for that being a rule?
He said he called it a suggestion. And do you really want to go down this road?
Because I started it, man.
I was gonna save this stuff for the mission ones, but whatever. But okay, I'll save it. Let me just go down this road.
Oh, come on, Tom. Don't be such a tease.
Oh my gosh. All right, so this was the reasoning behind it. The mission president, this happened in my last, half, maybe a quarter of my mission, that the mission president and his wife come out with this certain rules to do, and they called them more of a suggestions but guidelines, and that was on the list. There was you can't wear shorts at all, including P-Day. There was all kinds of stuff.
Man.
P-Day.
Playing basketball in jeans? What? You played basketball in pants?
Sweatpants, yeah. But,
so wait, you're saying that you had one day a week where you actually could sit down on the toilet and pee?
No, you couldn't.
I'm just making a joke about
the only time, and this because it caused an uproar. There's a lot of missionaries that said, "Wait, so can we?
Yeah.
can we stand to pee in our own apartment?" Because the what it was is the mission president's wife said that it just caused too much of a disruption or a noise, because there were some complaints, I guess, of members' homes that the missionaries would go in the back room, and I don't know if it was fights. Or maybe they were splashing.
They're crossing the streams like in Ghostbusters. Yeah.
All right. But time out here. This is what always got me on my mission. I never understood this whole like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die of guilt because I didn't read my scriptures today, and then like dick slapping your companion is like no big deal.
No, it was just the urinal streams we're crossing. That's all.
Whatever it was.
As far as I know, I mean, I don't know.
I didn't get like the potty humor pass. Like, you could be the biggest douchebag when it came to like potty humor and slapping your junk around, but as long as you're reading your scriptures, man, you are the holiest of holies.
Yeah, but that lends itself to kind of a Mormon mentality, which is the little things are just as big as the big things. So if you're keeping the little things, you feel justified, or at least not as guilty with the big things. I really think that that's a problem in Mormonism.
A lot of times when there's all these crazy rules that get built up in your mind, like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, sometimes you do get lost, because you start to feel guilt for one thing, and whether that's a lot of guilt or a little bit of guilt, depending on what the rule or the guideline is, yeah, I think you can get lost, and sometimes you just numb out. Like, depending on the kinds of rules that you're really facing, you can really get yourself lost and start to feel like everything's getting blurred.
I did want to come back to this idea of guilt and constantly being just buried in you're not good enough. And that kind of goes along with the small things being emphasized, but it's really fundamentally you're told you are flawed. In the Book of Mormon, you're even told you are an enemy to God, and that you are necessarily fallen and bad and basically designed to do wrong. And I think that mentality is really effed out.
I think we might be overstating it a bit here, because you also have the belief that every week, if you take the sacrament, you eat the bread, you drink the water, you're clean.
Wait, but that's only sort of true. That's only sort of true, Glenn, because how do you juxtapose that weekly free get out of jail free card with like the guilt of the deathbed repentance sort of doctrine, where it's not just for your deathbed, but in Mormonism, if you ever do something because you know that you can get out of the consequences of it later by doing exactly what Glenn said, later on Sunday, I'll just wipe this slate clean. It wasn't that big of a sin, and I feel bad, and I'm done. And then you can get into this pattern,
Well, and then Bob, you add the scripture. If you repent of something and then you do it again, all the sins from the past come back added onto you.
Yeah.
I have that out. DNC 82:7. The Lord will not lay any sin to your charge. Go your ways and sin no more. But unto that soul who sinneth shall the former sins return, saith the Lord your God.
Yeah.
Right. And there are even some bishops who take that literally. And if you have a sexual sin, or it doesn't even have to be sexual, but that's the easiest example, and you feel bad about it, when you go into that, they'll have you recount every previous sexual sin you've done. Like, is this the first time? Give me the history. Go a few years back. You can't just deal with it in isolation, because the church is obsessed with layering on that previous guilt and building it up so that you realize that you can't just use this get out of jail free card. So then it's just like this really weird psychological problem, because how do you repent of something when it gets harder perpetually, but you're always going to do it? So
yeah.
I don't.
Is this the exception, though, or is this the rule?
I think it's the rule, dude. It was for me.
So it must be the rule for everyone. In my mind.
I think about people in my ward, and just, I don't know. It doesn't seem like I'm surrounded by a bunch of guilt-ridden people.
But internally, they are torn apart. I think. I really believe that.
Well, yeah, I would agree with Matt. How do you explain the whole Utah having the highest depression rates, suicide rates, medication rates? How do you explain all that then, Glenn?
I was just there, and it's a dump.
Wait, I'm not asking. I'm not asking about the fires.
Weak, man.
And excuse me, but I take great offense to that, jackass.
Oh, it was just. I was just there for 10 days, and man.
And you were ready to get a anti-anxiety depression med.
Yeah.
You got this like bastion of snow skiing, camping, rock climbing. It is like a depressed person's haven. Okay, true. You can't tell me just
really?
Because you didn't have a good time. That's your argument.
You got Randy. I was just
Utah
joking.
is a beautiful place. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I miss living in Utah.
Okay, fine.
That was his point, dude.
But USC sucks.
Randy's now my favorite atheist all of a sudden.
No, but the idea of enduring to the end, forsaking sin, that whole thing that is constantly reinforced, I think undercuts the positive idea of, you can be clean, though your sins be as scarlet, they'll be white as wool, except they become scarlet again the next time you touch yourself or stand up to pee.
What really bugs me about this, I mean, we could actually spend an entire podcast on just the chastity mess, because what's really destructive about it is, I mean, there's so many levels and there's so many things. I mean, going from whatever petting is to whatever third base is to whatever, touchy-feelies to French kissing. I mean, where does all this fit in? And then, of course, the bishop's got to interpret that to whatever level of forgiveness he's going to institute, or whatever
probationary period.
Yeah,
normally you have to undo what you did for like 6 months or longer, depending on what it was you did, and then.
Well, here's a mission story. We had a counselor in the mission presidency who would do personal interviews, and he considered wet dreams, I shit you not, as essentially violating the law of chastity.
I got that too, man. That's not isolated.
I think that's common.
Oh wow! Crazy. My mission president, to his credit, when he learned about it, stopped that and told the boys basically, relax. It's called biology. So I mean,
wow,
and that's absolutely true.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, I had a great mission president.
Well, who's the general authority? Is it Packard that said that you got to tie your hands to the bedposts when you sleep or something like that? Does anybody remember that?
That sounds like Marky Peterson.
Marky Peterson. Yeah.
I'm not allowed to talk about that.
Let me jump in here if I can on the especially child sexual abuse. There's a really important concept that people need to understand is the defenders of abuse they all use the same techniques to one degree or another, and the most significant one is referred to as shared responsibility, meaning that they get their victims through grooming and through the processes that they use to feel that they are a part of the abuse. So they don't look at it as a bad touch. There's no such thing, kids don't conceive of good touch, bad touch, because these offenders are using good touches, and the child is willing, and the child is sometimes interested, and it feels good. And when they use those techniques, then a child gets these lessons. They're absolutely not going to be able to understand that they were a victim. They're going to see that is going to basically put the shared responsibility on steroids. The result is they don't disclose abuse. And I think that's one of the primary reasons why abuse is as rampant as it is in the Mormon Church. And it is pretty rampant, by the way, compared to other religions.
Can I give a quote for the Miracle of Forgiveness?
Please.
Go for it.
Okay. This is Spencer W. Kimball, president of the Church of My Childhood. He said, and also Yoda was modeled after him, apparently. Anyway.
It's true.
Also far-reaching is the effect of loss of chastity. Once given or taken or stolen, it can never be regained. Even in a forced contact such as rape or incest, the injured one is greatly outraged. If she has not cooperated and contributed to the foul deed, she is, of course, in a more favorable position. There is no condemnation when there is no voluntary participation. It is better to die in defending one's virtue than to live having lost it without a struggle. In other words, you're to teach your daughters, or, basically he's talking about daughters. You're to teach your daughters that if somebody forces themselves upon you, instead of going into survival mode, you should fight with all of your might. And it's better that you get killed in the struggle than to be raped.
Yeah,
That chilled my blood when I was forced to read that for masturbation on my mission. That, even as a believer, that chilled my blood. And now it is like utterly reprehensible.
That to me shows how that particular man and most of these men are just not inspired. They have no insight whatsoever, because he assumes that most rape takes place from a stranger or through violence, and that's the rare exception.
Right.
Date rape and these types of things, where the most common reaction that victims of abuse has is to freeze. And if he doesn't even understand that, just I'm offended at him. And you know what, Spencer Kimberly? You. I'm glad you're dead. Yeah, I said it.
He would be like 150 if he was still alive, but yeah.
Well, I just think like that statement is morally reprehensible. I really do think that, and I think that it's so difficult that, and I know that nowadays everything's a lot different, and there's probably a lot of listeners that are kind of rolling their eyes like, well, we don't believe that stuff anymore. Miracle forgiveness isn't even something that the church necessarily promotes, but yada yada yada.
Yeah, it's whopping like 30 years old. It's so long ago.
So antiquated.
But the problem is even if one father reads this and then takes it to heart and then structures his moral belief systems around this, and he actually teaches his daughter, I would rather you come home in a box than limp away from a rape, because once that happens, once you're raped, you're defiled. I mean, that is just, I mean, I don't even, yeah, I'm with you guys. I can't even wrap my brain around it, because it's so offensive and it's so destructive on so many levels.
Well, he's defining losing chastity. He's putting rape as losing your chastity. Do you think I would consider my daughter any less if she'd been raped? Do you think I'd think of her as losing something, of value?
Well, yeah, but it goes again to a myth, the idea, and I was taught this as well, is that with girls there is a physical deflowering, essentially, right? Something you can never get back. And I think these girls need to understand that is not true. You cannot tell if somebody's been penetrated. The hymen is a collar of tissue. It's not like a drum. So there is no such thing as popping the cherry or breaking the hymen. And I think that concept does mess with girls, that you really can't go back. There really is, as if there's a virgin test, and there's not.
Well, I thought there was a statement in there that said that the victim is not under any condemnation. And then the distinction was made that you've got to fight for it. It's better that you fight for it.
Yeah, but that's going to mess with you to the end. So what's,
But doesn't he say that the guilt, like the victims,
no,
no condemnation?
He says there is no condemnation when there's no voluntary. So if you just like relax and let it happen because you're just trying to survive,
or you freeze, which is the most
then
common
you're under condemnation.
reaction.
So that can be interpreted as voluntary participation if you don't fight. So he's basically defining not fighting it as voluntary participation.
Yikes. And these comments or these statements have not been retracted. It would be one thing if President Monson or whomever gets up and says to victims of abuse, this is retracted. This is not the position of the church.
What does the Church Handbook of Instruction say about this for bishops to counsel people? Does it address it at all?
It does. It does talk about victims of abuse, and it says that they are not that it's not sinful, basically, right?
Yeah.
The problem is
but
so
isn't that? I mean, so it's not a public retraction, but I mean, isn't that a change in?
But think about this, Glenn. How many members of the church have access to the Church Handbook of Instructions rather than Miracle Forgiveness?
Which is required reading for every missionary, by the way.
Yeah.
Is it still required?
Yeah, well, it was for my mission. I guess it's been 10 years or whatever. So
it wasn't required for mine.
But how many true believing? How many bishops have this on their shelf? Probably 98% of them.
Well, let me just build off this for a minute. I mean, just to bring this into perspective of nowadays, I mean, you guys have all heard the analogies that young women get in their young women groups about chastity and stuff like that. Like, if you lose your virtue, then you're kind of like this piece of chewed gum, pass this around, licked cupcake, whatever. Like the leader would chew some gum and say, okay, now you chew it. I don't want to chew it. Well, that's what you'll be like if you let your virtue go away.
And I always told those girls, I love cupcakes without frosting.
But I mean, okay, I can vouch that analogy and those stories are still being used today. I mean,
absolutely.
that's very. I mean, how is that not related to what we were just talking about with the miracle forgiveness? We're basically saying, if you lose your virtue one way or another, whether it's even implied through rape or whatever, then you are that piece of used gum. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how reprehensible that is. It just really, really bothers me. As a father of a young daughter, that just sends me right up the wall.
Why do you think it, if somebody's listening to this and they're like, yeah, I'm not Mormon and you guys are just, figuring this out a little later than the rest of us. I guess two things. How did it come about? And comparatively, do we even have a sense for how bad it was for us compared to just, regular, I want to say Christian or other religious upbringings that were associated with other boys growing up, or I don't know. I'm just curious of like where we stand.
I don't think we're that unique when it comes to this guilt kind of thing.
Really? You think that Mormonism is average? It's not maybe a little.
I think it depends on what you're talking about. I think when it comes to like adultery and chastity and stuff like that, I think that's pretty universal. I mean, look at the Muslims. That's pretty heavy.
Do they have like their own versions of licked cupcake analogies? It's like you're like a used burqa, or I don't know. Like how do
I was thinking more like a falafel.
I was gonna say they stone the women. The men get off okay, but the women get stoned.
For me, it comes down to my realization as I was thinking about this is that religion's just destructive. I really am getting to the point where I don't see it as being redeeming, because anything that's good that religion might bring that's good isn't universal to religion. For example, guilt can be positive. If I hit my kid and I feel bad about it and I think, you know what, I'm not going to do that again. It's not because of religion, it's because of the impact that it had on my kid. So I don't need religion to do that. The only thing the religion provides is kind of a warped sense of things that otherwise aren't harmful and aren't wrong, and creating assigning kind of wrongness to them, I guess.
So Matt, did you never get a sense of hope from your religious experience? Because this was something, Bob asked this question, how did we come to where we are? Like what was our journey through guilt or maybe out of guilt or wherever we are with guilt? And for me, somebody wrote a book, I think it was in the 80s or maybe early 90s, that was called Believing Christ, and it was, like they made
Stephen Robinson.
That you make it's not believing in Christ, it's actually believing him. That was the big deep thing. But and I remember when I heard about that, I thought, yeah, that makes sense to me. Why is it that we don't believe in the atonement more? We don't believe this, you guys kind of made light of the sacrament, like a get out of jail free card once a week thing. But it seems to me that there are these ideas and doctrines built into religion that could bring a lot of hope and elevation, but there's almost a conscious effort by a lot of leaders to put those things aside and say, well, don't get your hopes up.
Yeah,
because
but Glenn,
you got to stay in line.
They provide the medicine to the illness they cause. That's where they provide hope, but because they've mired you down in guilt, and then they give you this kind of sunshine or whatever. I see it as like a snake oil salesman who creates the ills. Are you bald? Here, take this. And they're creating kind of the problem in order to sell you their solution. That's my problem with it.
Well, I guess my defense would be to religion is I wouldn't necessarily think you should throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think there are some good things with religion. I mean, yeah, we're obviously talking about some of the warped things that religion can do in causing people to have a lot of unnecessary guilt, and I think that that's very, very unfortunate. I just think that there should just be more awareness. Is
there not secular guilt? I mean, is guilt a religious thing that?
That's where the remorse definition comes in.
Yeah, well, I'll just tell you, as a true believing Mormon, I felt tons of guilt. Now that I'm an atheist and a secular humanist, my sense of remorse for things that I do that don't align with my morality, and I still do things that I feel bad about.
I know, Randy.
That hasn't gone away at all. It's just that
does it feel the same?
It doesn't. It's not as much, but I now feel remorse for things that really matter.
Right.
Instead of like silly constructs that I'm not adhering to, that are unrealistic and impractical and irrational. Like I really should be bigoted against gays. I should feel good about that.
No, but so if you're bigoted against religious people, do you feel remorse about that? That you're not like giving them the benefit of the doubt?
Well, there are times when I find myself judging people or giving having preconceived notions about people because they're like Jesus freaks, that some people would call them. But I feel really bad about that afterwards. It's not, and I don't treat them any differently. But I do have like a knee-jerk reaction when somebody has a shirt that says "He died for me," which happened just yesterday, and I immediately was like, "Ugh, I don't like you." And then like afterward, I'm like, "Oh, she was a really nice person." I felt really bad for that. So I should have felt bad for that. I shouldn't judge someone just because they believe in the Jesus. It's the things that really matter. I think it boils down to.
Yeah.
Instead of arbitrary constructs.
Dude, if I'm unkind to somebody, and I am unkind to people now and again, I do regret it. And if I make a person feel bad, I do feel bad for doing that, and I want to improve myself. But it is the things that matter to me. It's not the things that just where I say that don't hurt other people or don't have effect on other people or other things. If I litter, I'd probably feel bad because I think that has an impact on things.
This is good. We're getting breaking news that atheists still have consciences. That's good.
Is that ethics news? And moral?
Only in America is that breaking news.
The thing I've been harping on lately is couple missionaries. How many couple missionaries feel guilty or grandparents feel guilty because they're not going on missions? But that should be turned on its head. They should actually feel guilty for leaving while their grandkids are at a certain age as they're growing up for 18 months. And some of these people do it over and over and over again.
That's a good example. I think that's a good example because I do think they do feel guilty for it, but I think they just outweigh the guilt for one for the other, and that's unfortunate.
Exactly, and I think that highlights where the priorities are.
Yes.
Immoral religious people.
Well, here, let me give this example as far as like listening to your leaders and feeling guilty that if you don't obey them or listen to what they have to say. I don't know if you guys read this article that was in the Daily Herald about the MTC building being raised up 9 floors. Did you guys read this story?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Again, let me interject real quick. Now, what we were discussing here was about the controversy with the MTC 9-story building, and I'm going to play a clip from the Radio from Hell show on X96 in Salt Lake City, Utah, with Carrie, Bill, and Gina. And this particular clip was played on July 10th, 2012 in the 7 o'clock hour. And you can access their radio show and their podcast at x96.com/podcast.
A majority of Provo Mormons who are fighting construction of a proposed high-rise at the Missionary Training Center have dropped their opposition after a local church leader asked for their support during a worship service. On July 1st, a Mormon church stake president asked members of Provo's Pleasant View First Ward during sacrament meeting to support the church's first presidency and quorum of the 12 apostles in their decision to build a 9-story classroom building, which some neighbors had opposed because they felt it was too high in their neighborhood. Neighborhood Chairman R. Paul Evans, a practicing Mormon, he hasn't gotten it right yet.
R. Paul Evans, Richard?
I don't know.
It's not the same.
Had led the opposition to the project. But after meeting with the stake president, he said he felt it was important to support the decision of the first presidency and the quorum of the 12 apostles. Previously, Evans' group had felt comfortable opposing the high-rise plan because he said church leaders emphasized the zoning issue was secular, not ecclesiastical. But Sunday's invitation to sustain the brethren was anything but secular. According to Evans, Chris Randall, president of the Sharon East Stake, announced from the pulpit that he was sharing a message from L. Whitney Clayton of the 70 and Elder Russell M. Nelson of the 12. They consider the MTC rebuild an ecclesiastical matter, a decision that was the result of careful and prayerful discussion. Evans had already heard the message the preceding Monday at a meeting with Randall. Subsequently, Evans announced in his email to Provo's Community Development Director Gary McGinn that he was backing down after 4 months of trying to get LDS church leaders to sit down and consider alternatives that respect residents' concerns. They think that the building is too high and it's going to mar their neighborhood. Well, this story has made national news.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how it's reported on in a magazine called Politics. As Mitt Romney's candidacy fuels an ongoing discussion over how the Republicans' faith will influence him if he reaches the White House, a minor controversy in the heart of Mormon country has sparked a heated local battle over the role of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in secular politics. At issue is a classic not-in-my-backyard fight. Some Provo, Utah residents are worried that a 9-story building in the Mormon Church wants to build will mar their views of the snow-capped Wasatch Mountains, it says here. But so now these people are taking it to, what if Mitt Romney? What if the LDS Church says to Mitt Romney, well, this decision that you're thinking about making, here's how we think you should make it.
Is that the way that they direct the story?
Yeah.
It's the classic, Kennedy's a Catholic, we don't want to take orders from the Pope?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're taking it to that. The incident blurs the lines between the Mormon Church, how the Mormon Church itself in regards to what it's willing to assert religious authority in secular matters. The Church has long held tightly to political neutrality and says it only throws its weight behind an issue that it deems to have moral consequences. But this building doesn't have moral consequences. It's just a zoning issue. While the Church is lobbying to get a construction project approved is unsurprising, some local Mormons were taken aback at what they see their religious leaders turn a local debate into a test of religious faith. I grew up thinking ecclesiastical matters were doctrinal, not zoning issues, said Lori Johnson.
Do any of you know people who voted for or voted against gay marriage who morally were supported it, who basically said, I don't like the law, the where they say that they can't marry, but because my leaders told me to.
Yes.
John DeLynn actually had a live call-in podcast, and this young, beautiful woman called in, and she had this like natural love and empathy for gay people. She was a devout Latter-day Saint, growing up in the Bay Area. And she called in.
Hi, this is Nicole.
Hi, Nicole.
I'm from California, and I actually voted in the Prop 8 campaign. And I'm friends with Carrie, but I voted yes in Prop 8. And I know it might offend some people here, but I had a really, really hard time with it. I have a lot of homosexual friends, gay and lesbian friends. Bisexual. I know a lot of people, and they would be very upset if they knew that I voted yes. But my point is that I had to search it out in my own mind, and I had to stay true to what I believe and follow the prophet for what I believe. And I know that he is a true prophet of God, and that if he tells me to do something, I'm going to do it. Kind of like in the beginning of the podcast when we were talking about the primary song, follow the prophet, he knows the way. And that's our whole thing. And I didn't want to vote. I contemplated not voting. It was a really, really hard decision. And so what it finally came down to was, am I going to sustain my church leaders or not?
At this point, John DeLynn says to Nicole, the brethren have been wrong before. Have you considered if they could be wrong about Prop 8? And how would that make you feel?
I would be ecstatic if they were wrong. If then later they decided, you know what, homosexual males can hold the priesthood and they can go to the temple and they can get married and they can do whatever, I would be ecstatic. Like I said before, my best of the best friends are gay. And like, I know a lot of them are active members in the church, and I know that they struggle with a lot of things, and I feel like they miss out on a lot and it seems like it's not fair that they can't experience relationships and things like that. But at the point where I am right now is what the prophet's saying at this moment in time, I just have to go with that. And if it ends up changing, then I can vote a different way later on.
And I'm going to have to follow my prophet. This went utterly against her internal moral compass. But because the prophet told her to, she voted for Prop 8.
But isn't that
documented?
But isn't that also her internal moral compass, the devotion to the prophet?
She's outweighing which guilt she wants to deal with the most.
That was implanted in her as a child.
I think there's an even more perverse example that happens all the time that just defines this as being a big problem. And just really what we're talking about is guilt is power. This is one of the most powerful tools that the church has. The biggest irony is that as missionaries, we went out and we preached that families could be together forever. That was like the universal message. What happens after you die? We have the answer to life. You get to live with your family forever. We would teach this beautiful message. But then what inevitably happens in every family, maybe not every family, let's call it half the families, is that there is going to be somebody in the family who is opposed to this dramatically and doesn't want anything to do with the church, but yet this other person in their family is embracing it wholeheartedly. So the irony is that the most beautiful doctrine that reels you into the church in the first place is tossed aside for the fact that the church comes first and you yourself will be spiritually uplifted by rejecting your family and choosing the church over your family, even though that was the hook that got you in a lot of cases, for these converts in the first place. And that to me just highlights just how ridiculous this whole setup is, but yet it happens over and over and over again.
So let me ask you guys about spiritual experiences and spiritual feelings, because as I'm thinking about these awful people that we're describing, these awful Mormons.
They're not awful. Yeah. They're wonderful people that have been inculcated.
But let me. I think part of this inculcation and part of this whatever was implanted in their youth was the ability to feel very strong feelings where you feel like you're connected to God, and in those moments it kind of washes the guilt away. Is that a true statement or is it not? What do you guys think about that?
To build off Glenn's question, why don't we play another clip from the BBC Radio with Stephen Muhall?
The ways in which one can alleviate the experience of shame and of guilt. I said about shame a little earlier that what you try to do, in effect, is get out of the sight of others, to disappear, ideally. In the case of guilt, that won't do any good. What guilt drives you to do is actually to atone for the wrongdoing. You try and engage in some kind of act of reparation to try and alleviate the harm that you did that created the guilt feeling in the first place. And that means that in guilt, you have a focus on the victim of the wrongdoing. And if you put together that focus on the victim with the idea of individual self-criticism, what you get is a sense that guilt might be thought of as a much more mature, progressive form of moral thinking than shame. So if you have an ethical culture that's built around the notion of guilt, you're building into it an idea of autonomy, emancipation from social expectations and norms, and a genuine concern for the harm that you did to others. And that sounds like the core of any genuine morality.
I don't think it washes the guilt away. I think it just categorizes it. I think it's just a matter of
what washes the guilt away. I didn't follow. How does this work, Glenn?
Like if you're having a really strong spiritual feeling, you're praying to God. Maybe you're praying for repentance. Maybe you're praying for something, and you feel the Spirit come over you. You feel like you've been answered, and you feel like, okay, good. There's still a link. I'm still loved. I'm a child of God. It's all good. And even if they're praying for, your family members, Bob, are praying for you to come back, and they feel that Spirit, whatever those spiritual feelings are, that it's kind of the counterweight that keeps people engaged and relatively happy or content, even with all of the guilt that they're feeling for not measuring up in other areas.
Yeah, that sounds good, but I think it also can just result in like a version of bipolar disorder, like because sometimes you're really low and you're in the depths of the depths because you're feeling really guilty for all sorts of things, and other times it's okay because the Lord's got your back and you're praying, and it just creates for some, there's a reason, as was mentioned earlier, that Utah leads the nation in depression, and I think this is kind of one of those reasons, is the ups and downs of having all the answers but having so much pressure on you for having all the answers. So you come and go in that joy versus sorrow, I guess. I don't know. And I want to say one thing about the whole guilt with the family members and that sort of thing, and maybe this is just me wanting to like throw out a standard disclaimer or whatever, but I think with my family in particular, it kind of ebbs and flows, and I feel like they can't fully, like they actually, most of them do a great job of embracing me for who I am, but as long as the church has them shackled, the inverse of that is that they're feeling guilt in a different way, because if they really do come to me and engage with me on this plane that's outside of a religious conversion context, then they are sort of going against some of their core beliefs. It's very subconscious, though. They would deny this, of course, but it just creates this weird haze over our relationship, even if we're trying for it not to, just because by definition there's no way to get out of it unless you unsubscribe, and you can't unsubscribe if you believe in it. Like there's no way to have your cake and eat it too. Does that make sense?
Well, yes, it makes sense to a degree. I guess for me, because I'm still sort of treading water in it. I think you can. I think you can unplug, maybe unsubscribe to a lot of the literal or more fundamental structures of belief systems inside the church and still be okay. Like if they could just drop the whole, you don't have to believe that the church leaders are, maybe infallible or very close to infallible. If you just think of them as just guys, just doing the best they can, that really shifts a lot.
Yes.
And I think
how many TBMs do that though?
I know. I'm just saying it would be cool if more would. That's what I'm saying.
The thing that really disheartens me and just breaks my heart is, as you guys know, my dad is awesome.
Yeah, he is.
But here's the thing: when a Mormon parent could raise a child to be incredibly successful in every way, he could be a physician doing free work in Africa for the underprivileged, have a beautiful wife, having great sex every night with his beautiful wife, and be financially independent. But if he doesn't have the exact same metaphysical beliefs as the father is a failure to some degree. And that breaks my heart that my dad feels like he has failed as my father to some degree because I don't share the exact same metaphysical beliefs as he does.
But
and it's wasted energy and it's wasted sorrow.
Well, I think you're overemphasizing exact, but I get your point.
Because I completely sympathize because I've got family members the same way, even in my wife's family, that feel the same way where, if their children aren't raised properly, then they take that burden on themselves, especially when it comes to keeping them in the church and whatnot, even when they become adults and whatnot. But but do you blame more of the church of that, or do you blame the individual? Because like what Bob was saying, can't they take don't they have the powers to take the shackles off themselves? Why is it the church that's got the power over them, or do they have the power to take the shackles off themselves?
Yeah,
well,
I blame the church.
I blame the church more too, because it's really the church doesn't facilitate a middle. Tom, you're doing it, and it seems like it works for you. Your salad bar approach to Mormonism, or whatever, and that's great. But like, the church isn't structured that way. In fact, it's structured exactly the opposite way. It is trying to minimize the Tom Perrys of the world. It wants less of you, not more than you. And
I agree.
And you're just not letting them have it. You're like, no, I'm gonna ride the middle way here, and F you. Well, that's probably, those are my words, not yours. But
just 2 conferences ago, Elder Russell M. Nelson, the heart surgeon, apostle, condemned cafeteria Mormonism. He says you cannot be a true Mormon and be a cafeteria Mormon. So he utterly called you out, Tom, and condemned you.
Thank you for the reminder there. But
that was have enough 2 conferences ago.
But there's other general authorities that say we want you here even if you don't believe in everything. I mean,
they contradict themselves.
Yes,
all
yes.
But it comes to the perspective of the family members, of the loved ones. And my parents are the same way as Randy's. I know they feel guilty about where I am, and I try to hammer into them that they are not the reason why they are the reason why I am the way I am, because they brought me up kind of free thinking and all the superlatives and the positives that come from that. But they don't recognize that. But for me, I blame the church. And I sound very angry against religious people generally, and that's not the case. I really appreciate religious people, and I can respect them, and I think I understand where they come from. My venom is towards the institutions and the religions, and so I think it's important to make that distinction. Is it's not towards the people. I support all people wherever they are. It's these organizations and these institutions that I think are damnable.
Well, Matt, when the stake president and the bishop came over to try to reclaim your soul that one night, your line has always stuck with me, because the church always says, hey, you know what? The church is true, but the people aren't. So don't let people offend you. And you're like, know what? That offends me. The people are true. It's the church that isn't true. So that's why, when Glenn says that we're talking about these horrible people, I don't think they're horrible people. I think they're awesome, wonderful people. I know, like, the majority of the Mormons I know are wonderful people. But it's the church that needs to maintain this institutional control over them. And so I'm in the camp with Matt and probably Bob that I blame the church more, because I know these people. They're good people.
I think we actually see more eye to eye, and I just think it's more of a level of responsibility where we put more blame towards the church or more blame on the individuals. I think that varies per individual and whatnot, but I guess I don't want to send this into a 5-hour podcast. We should probably wrap this up anyways. But
to bring that full circle, though, is I don't think man is an enemy to God. I don't think, this idea of original sin. I really think, by and large, at the core, all people are good, and they're good despite religion, not because of it. But generally, people are just good social beings who really don't want to hurt other people for the most part. So that religion has been able to convince people that somehow they have contributed to the goodness of man is perhaps the greatest cons ever to take place.
Now you're a prosecuting attorney, right?
Yes.
And you believe that people are innately good.
Yeah, and I deal with I have seen that would curl your guys' toes. I have seen stuff that, if a soul exists, has damaged my soul to never be recovered. And I still believe that, by and large, people are good generally. If religion truly makes bad people good, and I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I'd like to see examples of that. But if people, don't drink and otherwise would be alcoholics and do real damage to people by drinking and driving and these things, and they don't because of Mormonism, then yes, that's good. I really think it's overstated how much of the baby there is in that bathwater.
I guess I'm just saying that for some people, religion can be something that adds to their ethics and their morals, and obviously for some, it can do the exact opposite. So,
but Tom, do you think? And I think Randy made this point earlier. That could very well be true, but you could find something just as good elsewhere without all of the baggage. So there's nothing exclusive to religion. So like when it really does help people, it's just because they didn't walk another block down the street to the community organizer building rather than the religious building. I'm just making up.
I completely agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
To quote Spencer W. Kimball, is those people where religion really does make them better. I think they're the exception, and blessed be the exception.
All right. Well, I think this is a good place to end. Any final words? Anyone for the closing prayer? Is that how we end this?
Yeah, I like it. I love you guys. You guys
are rocks.
You guys are awesome.
I don't think we had a proper closing. Should we start over with the closing and then what do? Do you fade to music after somebody says, "Does anyone volunteer for the closing prayer?"
I think what you just said right there is perfect. We need to take that out and use it.